15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
This is 420 Law Office Radio. All right, welcome to this special edition of 420 Law Office Radio. It is my pleasure to present some clips for you. I was interviewed by Professor James Fetzer. Professor Fetzer is an illustrious individual, a public intellectual, really unequaled. You've got to check out his radio program. Just go to Google and type in Radio Fetzer, and you'll find out all about James Fetzer. He is an honored professor, a McKnight honored professor, and someone who taught logic and critical thinking for about 35 years in the university system, as well as being a very published author, and as well having been a vet and someone who's really interested in justice. And here is his interview of me all about the great medical marijuana and the great marijuana conspiracy. Thank you so much for joining, and let's enjoy this interview. And thank you, Professor James Fetzer, for focusing your spotlight on myself and my interest in this topic.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal. Well, I have a special guest for the second hour, Stewart Richlin, who's been a lawyer in California for 25 years, focusing on the rights of medical marijuana patients and their collectives for 6 years. Stewart recently won an injunction against the city of Los Angeles and has been qualified as an expert witness in court, testifying in support of the defense of medical marijuana patients. I 100% agree with you. I think marijuana actually ought to be legal all over, and there are so many reasons for that, Stewart. But I want to just welcome you here to The Real Deal. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. You know, I'm not just a hair club user, I'm also the president. What I mean to say is I really love your show, and I'm a fan. And it's such an honor to talk about the marijuana, really what I would say is the marijuana conspiracy. Every much as crazy and intense and multifaceted as any other of the conspiratorial things that we've discussed together on your show and listened to and been studying on the internet for so many years all together as a community of listeners. So I'm real jazzed that you had an interest in letting me present some information about the great marijuana conspiracy. You know, I'm not the first person to bring this issue up, and I stand on the shoulders of giants who helped me to be able to focus my law practice on medical marijuana rights, among them, you know, our forefathers, because our forefathers, George Washington and all of those wig-wearing, freedom-loving revolutionaries who created this amazing country and who drafted our Constitution, they were all growers, and many of them documented users of hemp/cannabis/marijuana. Did you know that, Jim?
That may well be a reason why they were much more relaxed and better in their judgment and their dispositions than most politicians today, Rich.
Yeah, that's very likely true. Well, we have quotes from, you know, Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson about the fond memories they have of the moments that they spent enjoying their corncob pipe full of marijuana buds on a summer's evening. Those are some of the great moments of life. Now, of course, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were first written on drafts of the Constitution, of the Declaration of Independence, that were all written on hemp paper, because hemp is really the number one agricultural product of the last century. And it turns out that the making of cannabis illegal might have been, well, maybe a conspiracy among a bunch of different interests that wanted to move us away from the natural order of things, as Gatewood Galbraith, former governor candidate, called it, the natural order versus the artificial order of things. And so somewhere around the making of cannabis illegal, we had the introduction of all kinds of synthetic medications and synthetic fibers and, synthetic solutions to the needs of life, whereas in the past, cannabis had been really one of the main providers of the needs of life. It's the preeminent source of fiber, and the word canvas comes from cannabis, and it's the original medicine that was used as a pain reliever, anti-inflammatory, for labor, for migraines, for operations, to prevent seizures, to reduce tumors for millennia. And then we have the use of cannabis as a fuel. The oil is a perfectly clean-burning fuel, not to mention it contains all the essential fatty acids a human being needs. The seed porridge itself contains protein mixed in with the essential fatty acids in an amazing meal, both for livestock as well as humans. In fact, original porridge that everyone knows about was probably made of hemp. So what's with these three names? Well, it was originally known as cannabis everywhere. In fact, the word cannabis is in the Bible, and there's a spiritual aspect of cannabis because of the burning bush and the nature of the early Israelites' relationship with cannabis was that it was considered a sacred substance that was part of the ritual of communicating with the Almighty. But in addition to that, it's got an amazing medical value that's now been recognized, and yet this prohibition goes on. And then the last little cherry on top is not only is it an amazing medicine, but it turns out that it may be the ultimate cure and preventative for cancer, one of the main causes of death. So, when we talk about the history of cannabis, I would refer your listeners to The Emperor Wears No Clothes, written by Jack Herer. Amazingly, when marijuana was made illegal here in the United States, there was a name change, All the doctors knew it as cannabis. Cannabis indica was one of the mainstays of the doctor's bag for 100+ years. It's been in the pharmacopoeia in the United States for 100 years. And before then, it was the #1 medicine.
Jim Fetzer, returning with my special guest, Stewart Richlin. We got cut off after exactly 10 minutes on the air. So I'm hoping that won't repeat itself. As I say, there's some days things just happen. Stewart, please do continue.
My pleasure. Hey, Jim, will you let me know, where was I when I got cut off? You remember.
Well, you were talking about the extensive use of medical marijuana. I remember about smoking that pipe full of marijuana buds. That sounded like a wonderful way to spend an evening on a porch.
Right. That was actually a quote from Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, that's marvelous.
And, when marijuana was made illegal, ironically, no one really consulted the AMA. In fact, by calling it marijuana, the one witness for the AMA that was in the hearings, initially his first comment was, the only reason the AMA hasn't come out against this Marijuana Tax Act is because marijuana was described as a killer weed from Mexico, and the doctors had only realized 2 days before that what they were calling marijuana was the medicinal plant cannabis, which is a benign substance in use in America with perfect safety for over 100 years. So by switching the name, the first question is, why was the name switched for these hearings? Why did they change what was known to our forefathers as cannabis to marijuana, which was a derogatory Mexican slang term? And even the doctor from the AMA said, we cannot understand, Mr. Chairman, he persisted, why this bill should have been prepared in secret for 2 years without any intimation, even to the profession, that it was being prepared. He and the AMA were quickly denounced by some quick talking by the committee members and Anslinger, Harry Anslinger, who was a former prohibitionist, basically looking for a new job now that booze was flowing freely again. So the prohibition conspiracy theory includes bigotry, and the marijuana word itself was designed around yellow journalism describing marijuana-crazed Negroes, quote-unquote, raping white women, and marijuana-crazed Mexican laborers given the strength of 100 men by smoking this loco weed. So, believe it or not, the same Hearst combine, the same Hearst group of yellow journalists, the same Hearst group that bought Popular Mechanics and did that amazing whitewash of 9/11.
Yes.
That same group was involved, had their fingers in the yellow journalism relating to reefer madness, which became the excuse for getting rid of nature's best medicine and instead moving us towards this world where we must buy medicine in a synthetic form from the pharmaceutical companies and also get paper from forests.
Now, Stewart, my inference has been that the parties that have the greatest interest in keeping marijuana illegal are those that offer competing products, the tobacco industry on the one hand, but more importantly, the alcohol industry, so that they want to, defeat those who prefer to smoke their high rather than drink it.
Absolutely, Jim. Whenever we want to know what's really going on in a subject, A, follow the money, B, qui bono, C, on whose side is which bread buttered. And you always have a funny way of being able to find out exactly where everyone falls on an issue when you consider these points. So we certainly have an issue in this country right now with big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma, all agreeing on one thing. Cannabis should not be made legal because cannabis is a far superior substitute and or competitor to the products that we peddle. Then it gets even deeper because we have seen how it ties into racism, the crusade against marijuana, how it was the utilization of ignorance and sensationalism and control of the media that let it happen, how experts were not consulted and experts disagreed, even the AMA, and were discounted. Does this sound familiar to a lot of the other quote-unquote...
I'm afraid it does.
quote-unquote conspiracies in our world? People don't like to consider that small groups of people can have effect on policy and move the course of history because no one wants to feel out of control. And no one wants to have the kind of dissonance cognitively that can happen when one finds out that one's cherished beliefs may not be true. So those of you that are listeners probably have learned not to build your house on nonsense beliefs, but are looking for some logical inferences from observable reality and facts. And so when we look at marijuana, as it was made illegal, we see the AMA protesting, we see certain elements of the government that appear to be related with both the Hearst newspapers, the DuPont chemical company, and other old players that we've seen before, big pharma, big tobacco, alcohol, that move towards the elimination of what had been a very traditional healing herb. And now it comes to the prohibition and how we took this terrible turn. When we went for prohibition, all of a sudden, law-abiding citizens in the 50s and 60s who were experimenting with marijuana now were criminals. By criminalizing them, they started to identify with the protest movements and identify with the racial groups that were being suppressed and with all of the other liberation movements. And it was really kind of a radicalizing element. The marijuana smoking in the 60s was a big statement. It was like wearing your hair long or getting out of the man's type of jobs, not doing something that you didn't believe in, but taking over the culture. And it seemed we were riding, to quote Hunter S. Thompson, on the crest of a beautiful wave. And you could almost see it crash on the hills of San Francisco as it receded into the years of Nixon. And sure enough, Nixon puts his finger into this thing in around 1970 with the current Controlled Substances Act. Because, you see, the way that the government had made marijuana illegal was unconstitutional in the first place. Not only did they lie to Congress, but the actual law itself required self-incrimination. It was a Marijuana Tax Act. A tax stamp was required on every marijuana ounce that was sold. In fact, under today's dollars adjusted for inflation, it was a $1,400 per ounce tax. Okay, Jim?
Yeah.
So obviously no one got the tax stamp, and even if you wanted the tax stamp, they wouldn't give it anyway. But the point was that they claimed, therefore, that this wasn't making marijuana illegal. It was merely subjecting it to a tax that could destroy. Well, Tim Leary was arrested under that law, and he was in 1969 the defendant in a case in which he was able to, through good lawyers, to overturn the Tax Act. So in 69, it was realized that this Tax Act, which required you to buy a tax to do something illegal or else it was illegal, was, a catch-22, and it was self-incriminating, which is against the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. So what happened was the Leary case ended the old Tax Act, and then the Controlled Substances Act was passed under Nixon. And, Nixon really wanted to control protesters. At the time, we had really, really amazing young people who dropped out of school based on their principles to fight the Vietnam War. And we had just a great example of social movement, And so what happened was, in order to control these people, since First Amendment prohibits the regulation of speech directly, marijuana laws were used to silence protesters, and there are some notable examples of people who were socially active who wound up getting outrageous charges for small amounts of cannabis. Parenthetically, cannabis has never killed anyone by overdose. It's one of the most harmless substances on the planet that has any psychoactive effect. There was
Stewart, I remember a cartoon strip on Dudesbury where at a convention, Mr. Butts meets Mr. J, and Mr. Butts is boasting. He says he was responsible for 250,000 deaths last year. And he turns to Mr. J and he says, kind of sheepishly, no, not one.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? Let's just put it this way. It's hard for some people to grow up and realize a lot of the things they were told in school, the government schools, turns out to be a lie. And so just about everything that we were told in our youth about marijuana by the media, by the authorities, was a lie. And, of course, that led to distrust of authority and distrust of the police. And it also, though, led to some free minds. As soon as one realizes, well, maybe we should look again at some of these other assumptions that we've been relying upon from our so-called education or our de-education in school. So, yeah, Mr. Butts has killed, it's 250 to 400,000 people per year.
Yeah, and of course, alcohol is a huge taker of lives, through all kinds of incapacities, not just cirrhosis of the liver, but even, judgment impairment, drunk driving, and a host of other problems.
Yeah, the coroner in Boston did a little study where every single person who died in an automobile accident was tested for alcohol or cannabis. And the end result statistically was, of course, about half the people or more who were in accidents had booze in their system. But less than 2% had cannabis. And when they figured in that they figured more like 10% or more utilized cannabis at least once a month, that it was therefore statistically, something like 80 times less likely that you'd be in a car accident if you used cannabis than if you were absolutely straight.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And the point you made, Stewart, about separating the word cannabis from marijuana clearly was intended to make an historical disconnect so that those who are doing research wouldn't think to study the history of cannabis, which was so positive and unproblematic, when they were trying to demonize marijuana.
Absolutely, it's the oldest game in the book. It's like something straight out of an Orwellian 1984 program. We changed the name on the thing. Of course, back then, before the internet, if someone were to say, "Well, there's a terrible drug out there called marijuana, and we want to ban it, and it makes people loco and this and that," who would say no? If it were known that that was the same cannabis that was in every doctor bag and the same cannabis that had been used as a recreational smoke for forever and never hurt a flea, then people would have had a chance to complain. And that was what this Dr. Woodward complained about from the AMA. But, there's so many levels to this. And anyway, so now we're getting through the 60s kind of, and there's now a lot of experience with cannabis. And, where are the bodies, Jim? If it's so terrible and there are so many, they lied about tetragenic effects, mutagenic effects. They lied about the amotivational syndrome. We have, presidents and heads of major corporations that are all admitted potheads or have used cannabis. So what exactly is it that everyone's fighting about still? Even here in the state of California, where we have legalized, or at least we have a defense for medical marijuana, we still have the problem of the conflict of law, because federal law still says it's illegal, and the Obama administration has certainly sort of run cold, hot, and cold on whether they are going to honor their promise to leave medical marijuana patients alone in the various states. To scoot things forward after the 70s, somewhere in there, people started remembering not only was cannabis an excellent social medium and a revolutionary, thought-inspiring, creativity inspirer that was creating a brotherhood and a social experience, but people started remembering collectively and individually that cannabis was helping them with conditions, and especially as the hippie generation sort of moved into the middle years and the baby boomers aged, the typical conditions, which I call the terribles, and then the very typical conditions, which I call the everybody has, started to become known that cannabis helped those conditions, whether it's the everybody has, like arthritis or insomnia or migraine or headache, neck ache, backache, or, glaucoma, blood pressure, things that, are pretty ubiquitous, or the God forbids, like AIDS, HIV, cancer. On either end, and all through the spectrum of life, it seemed that cannabis provides a pretty good medicine, and as that knowledge started to become widespread, we had a groundswell of activity here in the state of California, and back in '96, the state of California, people of California, not the legislature, but the people of the state, passed a proposition which called for medical marijuana, and then since then the legislature added to it with something called SB 420. So we have our original proposition plus this legislation.
Just to clarify for those who don't know the situation in California, it's possible for a certain percentage of the public to get a referendum, a proposition on the ballot for formal elections that supersede the legislature, the governor, the whole bit. It's a real opportunity for the people to have their voice heard. And so what Stewart is describing is a medical marijuana initiative that originated with the people of the state of California, not the legislator and not the governor.
That's exactly right. In the wisdom of the writers of the Constitution of the state of California, there was a provision included for the people to propose and pass laws called the Proposition Program. And what's great is it sidesteps inertia-bound and ignorant legislatures, and it just puts the decision of what the law should be right in the hands of the people. And so in '96, by a decent majority, medical marijuana was permitted to be a defense here in the state. And things have evolved since then. Originally, it was sort of just a defense for an individual person to possibly grow his own cannabis, and maybe a caregiver could grow for the patient who was too sick to grow. And then it sort of expanded, and some bold and creative people started opening up compassion clubs and locations in which growing members and consuming member patients could meet and transactions could occur. Then it went even further, and there was the evolution of a rule called SB 420, which calls for collectives and cooperatives. And these are government-authorized and defined groups of individuals that can get together to cultivate, transport, and distribute marijuana here in the state among patient members. But what's, of course, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, if this was a good point to take our break, we have one break we must take, but, if you want to add a few sentences, that's fine.
Well, listen, I think this is a good time. Let's have a sip of coffee and tea and get back together right after the break.
Jim Fetzer, your host, with my very special guest this second hour, Stewart Richlin, who's a quite brilliant fellow and has focused on the rights of medical marijuana patients. I'd like to see marijuana made legal all over the country. It's an absurdity that it isn't. We'll be right back. It is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest today, Stewart Richlin. We're talking about medical marijuana. Stewart, how did you ever get involved in this specialized field of interest?
Well, I was an attorney with a generalized practice for many years, although I was pretty good at litigation and I had some good experience in transactions as well. I hadn't really found a specialty niche, and I wasn't really necessarily looking for one. And then in the course of a certain litigation, I was doing a divorce for a fellow, and he and his former bride had a medical marijuana collective they were managing, and I convinced the judge that this was legal and proper under state law and that she should go ahead and sign an order governing the operation of this marijuana collective. And believe it or not, the Superior Court judge with her fancy black robe signed the order. and this was in 2005. And word started getting out to other attorneys and other members of the community that some attorney had gotten some judge to sign an order basically blessing and governing the operation of a marijuana collective in any regard. And that was a very new thing to have happened. So I just pursued my interest, and my passion for cannabis continued to deepen as I got to know the patients. There was one young lady that I met who I represented also before a female judge, coincidentally, and the young lady had a knit cap on her head because she was just going through chemo treatment for lymphoma. And the judge from the bench recommended, had this lady, have you tried medical marijuana? I swear. And I was like, oh my God, California, here we come. Because the idea that a judge from the bench was literally recommending medical marijuana to my client, made me feel really happy. And of course that judge really liked us, and we got our victory. We got that person's rights reinstated with reference to her labor claim. But as these little victories started adding up, the referrals started coming because most attorneys and most fancy firms were unwilling to participate in this area due to the fact that medical marijuana remains a federal felony. So the fly in the ointment has always been that California law is in direct contravention to federal law. As far as the feds are concerned, it's a conflict. Interestingly, as far as state law is concerned, it is not a conflict. There is a state court case which explains that as far as the California judges are concerned, the California exception for marijuana for patients who are sick is just a little narrow exception to the exercise of police powers. And so there's a California argument that medical marijuana does not positively conflict with the Controlled Substances Act of the federal government, and therefore that medical marijuana is not illegal in the state of California because of that non-conflict.
Well, isn't it also the case, of course, the Constitution reserves to the states all the rights that are not enumerated under the Constitution? So,
oh, well, if you're going to start referring to the Constitution, the true law of our country, then 90% of these bullshit laws are going to disappear, Jim.
Isn't it amazing,
please.
Stewart? Isn't it? I've got a friend who says the same thing all the time. He's a libertarian, but he makes that point all the time. And and the abuse of the Commerce Clause, for example.
That's absolutely right. Well, the basis upon which the federal government claims to have jurisdiction in the states on marijuana is the Controlled Substances Act itself. This piece of Nixon legislation that is really draconian. It calls for a 5-year felony, Jim, to grow one plant. And growing a larger amount in excess of 99 plants is in the 20-year zone. We have a very serious problem where people who commit murder and rape are getting less time than people who grow a plant. I mean, I don't think you have to believe in any external creator concept to understand that the bounty of nature is our inheritance as human beings. And the Bible goes further by saying that, God has given those plants and bearing seeds and the herbs of the field, etc., to mankind for his medicine, for it says for his food and for his use, etc., which includes his medicine. So,
yes.
Regardless of whether you have a belief system about a religion or not, it just makes no sense to make a plant illegal. And there needs to be scientific evidence. We had those Qui Tam lawsuits that were done by Morgan and Wood, challenging the scientific basis behind some of the activity in the 9/11 investigation. The same thing really needs to happen in this normal litigation that's been going on now like 20 or 30 years. The normal group, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, has an ongoing lawsuit to deschedule or reschedule marijuana out of Schedule 1. Now, Schedule 1 is reserved for heroin, cocaine, not cocaine. Cocaine is actually used by eye doctors. It's Schedule 2. But heroin and I think LSD is in Schedule 1. I mean, serious drugs are in Schedule 1 that have no medical use. And it's just a lie. And that's why I think a Qui Tam might be an interesting approach, because there is no scientific way that anyone can claim there is no medical use for marijuana. marijuana is one of the oldest medicines in the world. It's literally listed first in the Chinese medicament list of the first herbologist in history who wrote down such a list. It's listed first for a reason. It is an extremely versatile plant that seems to have amazing effects for people with a wide variety of conditions. And that scares these doctors and these pharmacists because it sounds like a panacea, but it is.
Just to interject, I mean, it's an increasingly long list of disillusionments with Barack Obama. But when he had an early, town hall meeting and he was asked about the legalization of marijuana, he said it wasn't even on the table. And that seems to me to be completely absurd. I mean, you would have thought this guy was going to give some modernity to the drug laws in this country, which seem to be artificially in place to prop up the price of drugs. And I think the CIA has a major role here because it's probably the biggest drug running operation in the world.
Yeah, it's ironic here in Los Angeles, for instance, when people opposed the legalization, the groups that really opposed legalization were basically law enforcement, prison guards, and drug dealers. They can all agree on one thing: prohibition keeps them alive and keeps their bullshit jobs going.
Yes. You must know this wonderful book by Peter McWilliams, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do. It's probably the strongest pitch for freedom in relation to all victimless crimes ever written. Rich, if you haven't read it, you got to track it down. He makes the most brilliant case for the legalization of drugs. How you're creating talking about prohibition as an illustration. You're creating a new class of criminals. You have to spend all this money on law enforcement. You're breeding disrespect for the law because this is something that people want to do and they're being artificially restricted. When you punish them, you lose the taxes and the good work that they would otherwise be providing. You break up families. You eventually get this vision of the future of America with half of the population in prisons and the other half guarding them.
We had a really great candidate last time around, and maybe this time out again. Ron Paul last time as it seemed like a last-ditch attempt to begin to garner some support. I mean, I love Ron Paul, but I feel like he may need a little bit of guidance about how to communicate. He's a good communicator, but everyone needs to continue to learn and evolve. But in any event, sort of at the last minute, as an attempt to kind of garner some interest and support, he pointed out that if he were elected president, he would instantly pardon every single nonviolent drug criminal and get them out of jail.
Wonderful.
We currently have how many? Something like 80,000 people in jail at any one time, and there are, I think it's 800,000 annually. I'm going to have to beg off on quoting accurate figures, but there are so goddamn many families.
Yeah.
So many dads that are not present, and then we have the resulting problems with the next generation of kids. For marijuana, this is not a very good choice.
Wait, let me add, Rich, if you legalize marijuana, for example, then you can standardize it, you can regulate, you can tax it, you can solve much of the country's financial problems overnight. You break the back of the drug cartels. Mexico has been broken into kind of fiefdoms that are run by drug lords, and they're killing lots and lots of people down there. It's a very dangerous place to be. But if these drugs were legalized, it would no longer be possible for them to reap the wealth and maintain the level of fear and exploitation they currently exercise over large areas of Mexico.
Well, of course, that's true. I wish I had my son on the phone for this one because, legalization, although I have a passion for it, my focus is medical marijuana law under state law. But he's got the details at his fingertips about, for instance, the fact that in Amsterdam, where there's been more of a soft drug policy, there is actually statistically much less use of cannabis by youth. So that, in fact, the forbidden fruit is another reason why we don't want to criminalize and make a big deal out of something as natural and actually wholesome as cannabis use. But I've got a bombshell for you for this last segment here, Jim, and that is relating to medical marijuana again, just to pull it back to medical, and then maybe we'll get back to legalization for a little topper. But in the area of medical, we have a federal government that is prosecuting people and sending them to federal jail and threatening them and raiding them, forfeiting their property, saying that marijuana has no medical use. That's the whole basis of Schedule 1. That's the whole basis of the federal prohibition. That's the whole basis of the Controlled Substances Act. True, true. Now, here's the part that's a bombshell. There is a patent, and all of you web-savvy listeners, which is all of your listeners, I think, you've got to check out this patent, and all you need to do is go to the United States Patent and Trademark website, uspto.gov, and go to the patent search and type in patent 6630507. That's 6630507. And you'll see that in 2003, the United States government, as represented by the Department of Health and Human Services, owns a patent on cannabinoids. And here's what they say in their own abstract. While at the same time with the other side of their mouth, Jim, they're saying that there is no medical use for cannabinoids and for cannabis. Listen to this. Abstract of the patent owned by the United States government. Quote, cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. Abstract. Cannabinoids have been found to have antioxidant properties unrelated to NMDA receptor antagonism. This newfound property makes cannabinoids useful in the treatment and prophylaxis of a wide variety of oxidation-associated diseases, such as ischemic, age-related, inflammatory, and autoimmune diseases. The cannabinoids are found to have particular application as neuroprotectants, for example, in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults, such as stroke and trauma, or in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and HIV dementia.
Huge.
Treatment. Okay, now, this goes on and on to describe classes of cannabinoids medicine that are useful in all of these ways. Now, how can the government, out of the other side of its mouth, say there is no medical use for marijuana and that it's Schedule 1? This is an out-and-out slam-dunk proof, and any criminal defense attorneys that are listening in the various states, contact me and let's get the brainstorm going about how you can utilize these arguments to help free your clients. And I know you know some of them as well, and I will learn from you too. So just contact me and let's keep the dialogue going. And another angle on this, Jim, is that in our own pharmacies right now is a pill called Marinol. Marinol is Big Pharma's answer to marijuana medicine or cannabis medicine, but it only contains one thin portion of the marijuana spectrum of cannabinoids. It just contains THC, and instead of being natural plant-derived THC, it's made out of petrochemical synthesis. It's reportedly not a good drug for people who get great benefit from marijuana. They just don't care for this Marinol that you can get in the pharmacy. In fact, it's now a Class 2 drug. It started out it's Schedule 3 now. It started out as a Schedule 2, which meant that you needed a doctor's triplicate. Remember, the Schedule 1s are not used for medicine. The Schedule 2s are for like heroin or, for like Demerol, or the very heaviest of drugs are Schedule 2. I guess heroin's a Schedule 1. But the very heaviest of drugs are Schedule 2, and they require a triplicate, which means that the pharmacy must receive a copy, and a copy goes to the DEA, and a copy goes up your nose. But no, in the case of cannabis now, of this cannabinoid, Marinol, it's been reduced down to a Class 3, just like Tylenol with codeine. I mean, THC, the active ingredient in cannabis, is already in the pharmacopoeia of the United States, so how can they say that marijuana has no medical benefit?
Excellent point, Stewart. I love it. And
yeah, I've got another one for you. Here's maybe a similar argument, but we'll take you around the rosy on this one, and then let's see where we are.
Marijuana, by the way, isn't it falsely classified as a Schedule 1?
Yes, that's why I believe a quitom lawsuit would be appropriate.
Yeah, what a manifest absurdity. This is clearly for commercial or economic purposes. It is false medically and psychiatrically. It's ridiculous.
Well, I agree, and who knows? Maybe during the raid, the SEALs might have found Osama bin Laden's medical marijuana recommendation.
Well, he was a pretty mellow guy, I guess.
Oh my God! Well, that's there's not that many jokes in this one, so I do the best to throw one in.
Well,
when I
he
can.
did die in 15 December 2001, so it's quite a remarkable feat that the government has resurrected him to kill him again.
Well, I'm thinking if we have any more trouble, maybe we can bring him around for another death.
I don't know, why not?
There you go. Well, here's another little bit of cannabis propaganda and conspiracy theory. Back during the days of the 70s, we had an investigational new drug program, the IND, and in that program, a glaucoma sufferer and some other sufferers were able to petition the government for marijuana medically, and the federal government supplied it. And their agreement was they would continue supplying it during the life of these patients. So these patients have gone on to live much longer than expected, and they've been doing really well with medical marijuana, which the federal government mails them every month. And one of those people is a guy named Irv Rosenthal, and he's written a really cool book. You can find out all about that by looking up the IND program. So again, the argument goes, if there is no medical use for marijuana, then how can the federal government be providing medical marijuana to those people who are in the IND program? And why did they shut down the IND program? They shut it down because during the AIDS crisis, their information started getting out there that medical marijuana was helping these long-term survivors of AIDS, and that it increased their appetite. It got rid of a lot of their symptoms. Their skin started healing. They started feeling good. And this is a magic medicine. And you know what the federal government in its largesse did? And this was under Reagan, who wouldn't even say the word AIDS during his entire presidency, even though there was a crisis.
Terrible.
You know what they did? They shut down the IND program because they started getting too many requests from AIDS patients, and they didn't want to open up the floodgates.
Terrible.
So they shut it down in the face of all of these patients.
Something that actually works, which can't be said of most government programs.
That's right. And it's something that has worked forever, and that it works by stimulating the natural healing system in our body that causes balance and equilibrium, which is known as the endocannabinoid system. It just so happens that the cannabis plant and the human being share something in our chemistry. The cannabis plant can activate this healing group of nerve ganglia and synaptic receptor modulators to stop the overexcitation, to stop the stress, to stop the pressure in the eye and in the blood pressure, to normalize functions of the body like an adaptogen. So if your blood pressure is too high, it brings it down. If it's too low, it brings it up. I mean, it's magic medicine, like they used to say in that joke. How do it know? Well, it just knows. It somehow knows. And people have to make a decision now for themselves and their family if they have a condition. There are some folks that have a kid with ADD, and the doctor's been saying, we're going to give your kid Ritalin, and we're going to give your kid, amphetamines. And other people are saying, we're going to try cannabis. They've seen the research.
Yeah.
Go to YouTube and look up ADD and marijuana. Other people are going to make a choice about their own skin disease or conditions. There's a guy out there in Canada who's named Rick Simpson, and you can look up Rick Simpson online, and he's got this oil he makes of cannabis that he used to heal a skin cancer. And when he went to Canada Health and tried to show them, they freaked out. Instead of welcoming the information, they went into denial mode, and he decided to take the information viral. And there are now hundreds of thousands of people aware of how this man has cured cancer using cannabis oil. So now we're in the way, way end of the spectrum, beyond legalization, beyond decrim, beyond medical marijuana for people who have existing conditions. We're talking now about the future of medical marijuana, where cannabinoid therapies and marijuana therapies may be actually saving people's lives and curing cancers. And when you read this patent, you realize the government's known it. And when you find out about the study that they did, it's already back in 70s. It's like 74. They've known it stops cancers. We've all had family members that have died of cancer. The government wants us dead, Jim. The government is keeping information away from people that is able to save their lives and improve the quality of their lives. Why? And how can we allow our servants in our name to keep us and our family away from our God-given inalienable rights, including our rights to our medicine.
Well, it's frightening. It's frightening, Stewart, what you're saying, and it has the ring of truth. I don't have any doubt about it. And the question becomes, is it just to benefit those special interests that are going to make more money if marijuana is less widely used?
I don't know, Jim. There's conflicts of interest everywhere. But the thing is, we all make the right choice every day, our good neighbors. We're not thieves. We don't think of ourselves first, or the short way, or the way that doesn't help ourselves and the next 7 generations, as the Native American Indians say. I mean, logical people think their way into a point of recognition that win-win is better. Who are these people who deign to control the masses like sheep? Who are these people whose ego is so perverted that they are going to separate families, prosecute people, put them in jail, destroy lives, because of a plant, a harmless, victimless crime? I mean, it's outrageous.
And when you talk about the medical benefits, I mean, hemp itself is kind of a universal product. It can be turned into so many beneficial clothing, ropes, all kinds of shoes. I mean, there's a huge industry that could develop around hemp per se, even in addition to the marijuana benefits.
Of course, and not to mention, to speak now about that, when hemp is grown, 1 acre of hemp saves 4 acres of old forest trees that don't need to be cut down for pulp, for paper and such. And the fiber that we get from hemp is annually renewable, and it reconditions the soil instead of depleting it. And every time you grow something that grows that fast as a biomass, what that biomass does is it actually sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere so that it creates a perfect balance. That which we burn in the way of oil creates carbon dioxide, which is consumed again by the plant, releasing the oxygen again. So the green economy utilizes the natural cycles of the natural order of things to support the needs of the community. The synthetic economy is all about patents and control and consumers that are unempowered and rely upon these big government and companies to supply everything they need. Cannabis can supply what a farm family needs just from a patch. Cannabis as medicine, cannabis as fiber, cannabis as fuel, cannabis as oil. I mean, this is something that time has come. So everyone that's listening, of course, as with everything, has the opportunity to see if they want to disseminate information, get active, get legal, and stop this nonsense. And I hope you guys do, and I hope you join me.
Rich, I can't thank you enough for coming on. You're so clear, you're so articulate, you're so intelligent, you're so dedicated. I have nothing but admiration for what you're doing here. You have a website at 420lawoffice.com, is that correct?
Well, it sure is, and everyone's welcome. And although I can't claim anything as a following and also as much of a fun show as you have, because you know I'm a fan, but I do have a little radio, internet radio show that I do, a podcast every week, and I throw stuff on YouTube, and all the links are on that site.
Oh, wonderful. I'll repeat it again, 420lawoffice.com. Is it case sensitive? Do you need to capitalize the L and the O?
As far as I know, you can type it every way you'd like, even with your toes.
420lawoffice.com. Jim Fetzer thanking my special guest, Stewart Richlin, a brilliant guy. I'm very proud to have him on the show, and medical marijuana is absolutely 100% out there. I support it as I do the legalization of marijuana. I want to thank Stewart for being here and all of you for listening.
Well, I may know what we're
Our music is by The Ridiculites. Copyright 2011, all rights reserved. Used with permission.